Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is former District 3 Congressman Zach Wamp. Today, Zach may be better known as the father of County Mayor Weston Wamp and District Attorney Cody Wamp. Zach, before I ask what makes for a better election night, winning an election yourself or watching your children win an election, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Cafe Bustelo, I think, is what's in my morning.
Oh, that's a good coffee.
Yeah, I have, and I put a little bit of sweet cream in it, and just love a cup of coffee in the morning first thing, and then I'll come back with 1 cup in the afternoon, but that's my limits, 2 a day. But after I drink my morning cup, I go walk 5 miles, so it pretty much is out of my system by the time I go to work.
Oh, absolutely. So what is your morning routine? I know you're engaged and you stay in touch with stuff. You get up, you have your coffee, and
so that's changed a little bit as I've gotten older, because there was a period of time in my life where I hit the ground running. I mean, it's unbelievable. I was showered and out the door at 6 o'clock when I was in real estate business here locally. I'll never forget the morning after I got elected in 1994. I was at Fletcher Bright by 6:30 that morning doing my real estate stuff, because that's just the way I rolled at the time. In order to succeed, I had to be that kind of a heat-seeking missile, and had 2 little kids, and you kill what you eat. And so I had a different schedule. And then during Congress, they call it a combination of long days and short years, because you do have a real intense schedule, except for the 6 hours that you sleep or whatever each night, whether you're in the district or in D.C. But the older I've gotten, I like to start a little bit slower. So I go to bed by 10:15 every night, and I get up at 6, sometimes earlier, and I'll have a morning spiritual time. I spend about an hour and 15 minutes reading. I subscribe to 2 national clips so that I know what's going on in the world. I'm real interested in foreign policy and all the different economic challenges and political challenges of the country. So I intake information, and then I hit the streets just about every morning. I'll walk 5 miles. I did this morning through the foothills of East Tennessee and Lookout Valley where I live, and then I'll shower up and get to work by 9:30. But it's a much slower beginning of the day than I used to, and then I'll work till about 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon.
you value that morning time.
I do, and especially in the winter when it's darker in the morning, I feel like I'm more alone than when it's daylight, and I love the Christmas season when the lights are on. But it is, my wife's on a little bit different schedule. She's like a midnight person, so she's like the first 2 hours of the day every morning are by myself. And I do value that time, because it is my reflective time, and it's my intake time, and I'm not distracted. And the rest of the time, I'm pleasantly distracted because I've got 5 grandkids and another one on the way.
Oh, well, congratulations on that. And your morning routine is similar to mine. I get up early. My wife likes to get up a little slower than I do, but that morning time on the back porch, having a cup of coffee, catching up, just reflecting.
I also would say somebody's probably already said this to you, but I always wanted to be interviewed by Costa, but I really preferred Bob Costa, not Mike Costa. But Mike will do for today.
Well, Bob's my rich uncle. He's got the $S on the end of his name.
Well, the Bob Costa Masters, I know you're a golfer, and those are like moments, like epic moments for me, because he's a classic analyst.
Yeah, well, having a broadcast career and not being Bob Costas, I did get respect, not confused for him, but everyone
more respect than you deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just nailed it there. Well, I want to kind of trace how you got to where you are today. And I know you grew up in East Ridge, you had a couple brothers and a sister. Talk about growing up in East Ridge and your parents and how you grew up.
Well, my dad was a real good athlete growing up, could have played minor league baseball. He grew up in Coleman, Alabama. His parents were really uneducated. His father was a carpenter, but became a home builder because he learned how to lay block and plumb a house. And his mother had this vision that they would build a skating rink on their property out on the highway. And she actually literally sawed the wood with my father, who had 5 sisters. One died. He ended up with 4. So it's really one of these unbelievable American stories where she built a skating rink called the Wamp Family Skating Rink in Coleman, Alabama, and sent all 5 of her kids to college off of the revenue from that skating rink. And all the way when I got elected to Congress and go to Washington, people would come from Alabama to my office and they would say, was your family the family that had the skating rink in Coleman, Alabama? And I would say very proudly, yes. And then I usually tell that story because that's one of the most incredible stories you've ever heard. Neither of my grandparents had an 8th grade education, but they became home builders, entrepreneurs, skating rink owners, and got their kids educated. So my dad became an architect and moved to Chattanooga with Alan Durthick and Carol Henley, who had gone to Auburn with, and they had Durthick and Henley, and he was with Beyond Cooley and was respected, and at one time was the head of the Tennessee Society of Architects, and he designed 1,200 buildings in a 52-year architectural career. But we moved to East Ridge. He was a commissioner of baseball and softball. My two brothers and I were all three athletes. Swimming, my father founded the East Ridge Youth Recreation Center, where both my one brother dove and my other brother swam, and I played a lot of baseball and football and basketball, and my dad ran the youth rec league. So, but then we all went to Macaulay, and so the three of us at Macaulay, the three boys, my little sister went to GPS, and she still works for me today. She's my admin back office person in my business, but we grew up in an upper middle class family. Loving each other. I mean, really, really, really a great family to grow up in, but very diverse. And my parents had this laissez-faire attitude about us that if they loved us and taught us the basics, they could kind of let us run. And so we had a pretty wide range of experiences growing up. We did a lot of traveling, but we stayed close to the ground, and a lot of people knew us. And so it was really interesting to see where we all went. My older brother's a really talented musician and artist, and they're both architects, and so I ended up in the family business for a little while, but I started with Olin Mills Portrait Studios after college and worked for Mr. C.G. Mills around the country for a couple of years, and then came back here and worked for my family business between like 82 and 87 here when we were building some things besides just designing things, and ended up going in the real estate business myself. And so ended up before Congress with Charter Real Estate Corporation. I took Bill Sutter's place as the vice president of Charter Real Estate Corporation for a number of years. Sold a few big projects like the Golden Gateway in downtown Chattanooga, and ended up going over with Fletcher Bright. He asked me after I lost to Marilyn Lloyd in a very close election in 1992 if I would come over to Fletcher. And so the day I was elected, I was actually a full broker in Fletcher Bright's office in downtown Chattanooga. So I had like 6 years in the real estate business in Chattanooga full time, and closed about 75 deals. That gave me a real understanding. I was real involved in the Chamber of Commerce, the JCs, literally a couple of dozen nonprofit organizations, and just became a real active citizen from Chattanooga Venture to Vision 2000 to all the things that happened in Chattanooga. Really prepared me to lead. And then even losing to Marilyn Lloyd in 92 prepared me very well, because I had 4 years of work before I got to serve. And so second-time candidates are better candidates because they're more prepared to serve. And I kind of burned out the impurities of my candidacy in the 92 campaign. Came back in 94 as the front runner, got elected, and then had the privilege of being reelected 8 times.
And I want to go back to East Ridge. Where do you fit in the birth order? Oh,
I'm the middle boy, and I very much grew up like the middle boy, where the other two boys would say that I was mom's favorite. If she'd go to the grocery store, she'd take Zach with her. And Trent was rough, man. He kept snakes and all kind of animals and got hurt a bunch. That's my younger brother. He's the biggest of the three of us. Lewis, the extraordinarily talented musician and artist and architect, he's the oldest, but he's the smallest. In fact, he just spent the weekend with Kim and I for Father's Day. He had lived in Apalachicola, but he's kind of back here. And so anyway, it's a long story, but everybody's good. Everybody's got kids. Everybody's got grandkids. And so there's a lot going on in our family all the time.
Were you competitive with your brothers? I mean, was it typical three boys? Are you close enough in age to where you were?
Very close. Louis is 15 months older than me, and I'm 16 months older than Trent.
Yeah, so you all
we were competitive, but I'll tell you this, we were a unit. I mean, if somebody messed with one of us, they had to mess with all three of us, and that was a hard stop all the time. We took care of each other.
Were you known as the Wamp boys around East Ridge?
But both with the boys in East Ridge and the girls, we were known as the Wamp boys.
What were some of the things you talked about sports? So y'all are playing sports, but did you have like summer jobs?
Yeah, because of the way my dad grew up on a farm and building stuff and driving at 12 years old and just Coleman, Alabama spirit, he had us work hard. Yeah. And I actually embraced it. I think my brothers didn't like it as much as me, and especially my younger brother. But beginning at about 8 years old, I started mowing grass for money. I always liked having money and I always liked working. And so real early on, I mean, literally at like age 10, I was cleaning up a construction site for Fred Osborne, old man Fred Osborne, building homes in East Brainerd when we lived out there as I was growing up. But I always tried to have a summer job. And my dad had us working a whole lot on things. He had duplexes and apartments and things that he had us working on. But then as soon as I could old enough to drive, both a motorcycle at 14 and an automobile at 15. We had our learner's permit, and I bought my first car the day I turned 15 years old with my own money.
Yeah.
And we had to jump the car off to get it home, but I was so proud of it. I
What
paid
kind of car?
$480. It was a 1964 Triumph TR4A, and I bought it from Bill Brown, Buster Brown's father, the anesthesiologist, Buster Brown's father, down the street, had to jump it off and bring it home. And I worked on that thing like it was my pet, and it was incredible, how pretty I ended up getting the thing. And then I sold it for a profit and parlayed that into another car and another car and another car.
So you were cutting yards, doing odd jobs. Did you have any other typical summer job like fast food restaurant or?
Interesting because Bill Meadows lived down the street from me. His brother Robert Meadows was a good friend of mine, and his father Jug Meadows, who was this Central High School football legend, started a restaurant on Access Road called Bull and Bear Restaurant. And I worked there one summer, probably when I was 16 years old, because I was already driving. And behind the counter with me was Bo Watson's sister, Debbie Watson, who ended up being like a long-distance runner. We spent the whole summer cooking hamburgers and cheeseburgers and different things at the Bull and Bear Restaurant on Access Road. And then, of course, by the time I was before my senior year, I was an orderly in the operating room at East Ridge Hospital and cleaned up after the doctors. As soon as they finished at 5, I was in there till midnight, about 5 days a week, cleaning up the operating rooms at East Ridge Hospital, which is now Park Ridge, I guess.
Well, and I saw that in some of the information you gave me. I wanted to ask about that. How do you become an orderly in a hospital did you have a desire to go to med school?
No, that's right. At that time, I wanted to go pre-med and to med school. I wanted to be a doctor, and I had a real interest in that. And of course, I had a bad time in my life in college because I ended up starting drinking and going too wild in the fraternity and all that. But thankfully, by the grace of God, I was able to pull out of that. But otherwise, that was a direction I was headed in my life. I thought that would be a really good way to contribute, and it was of great interest to me. But I also tell you, my father was on the board of the hospital, so that's how I got the job.
So that helped.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, you're cleaning up after a surgery, I'm thinking about my squeamish self. I'm like, oh man, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, and then just taking pride in leaving it in a perfect condition, knowing what they were doing there the next day. And so it was just one of those things that I wanted inside of the hospital just to kind of see it from the inside out. And I think about that a lot now, going by there now. And I also grew up playing baseball right behind it, just where Spring Creek would actually flood sometimes. And our Dixie Boys baseball fields were literally right behind that hospital. So, man, I'd go frog gigging there sometimes at 2 a.m. I'd play baseball on that same property, and then ultimately I worked on that same property, which is really the story of my life here. It's got a real estate nexus running all through it. I still pay attention every Sunday morning to who's buying what and still do a few real estate deals.
Frog gigging is not a term I've heard in a long time. I used to go frog gigging out in West Tennessee.
No, that's actually a lot of fun for boys to get waist high in water, in the middle of the night, and you got a flashlight and you want to do a little frog gig, and it's like, at first you think, is this real? And then you realize, yeah, it's real.
Did you ever cook the frog legs and fry them up?
We did. It's just like fried chicken.
Yeah, absolutely. So very, very common with that. What did those jobs and all those activities teach you that you took to Congress with you that you still hold today? What were the lessons from that?
So I'll tell you that when I turned 50 years old, and you're in office when you turn 50 years old, somebody's going to try to raise money off of it. So we had a fundraising dinner the night I turned 50 years old. And I talked about the men that had taught me discipline and foundational lessons in my life. And I talked about Coach Bill Eskridge at McCauley, who frankly made a man out of me through McCauley basketball, because I went from being this short kid who didn't have a chance of ever playing to basically playing every minute of every game my senior year, and having a senior year that just so exceeded my expectations, my parents' expectations, or Coach Eskridge's expectations of me, Randy Webb was my sayah when I fought when I was young, because I was little and I felt like I needed to learn a martial art in order to survive. And
What'd you learn?
Bondo from Randy Webb, but then Taekwondo in college. And Randy, there's not a more physically disciplined, extraordinary physical specimen of a man anywhere around here than Randy Webb. If you ever knew him, he's just extraordinary. And he taught me a whole lot about grit and perseverance and tenacity and just mental toughness. And then, frankly, the couple years I worked for C.G. Mills had a tremendous influence in me. And while he was kind of a wild man compared to his brother Olin Mills, man, he was a man's man that only had daughters, and he kind of took me under his wing as a son because he did not have a son. And I was at that time still a little wild like he was, but I've always loved him in a deep way, and I think the day he died, he loved me in a deep way, and we just became friends. And then, of course, my dad, who I miss dearly, he died 3 days after I left my congressional service in a freak accident, fell down the stairs on his way to Mankrapatten to play tennis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I mean, he really got to leave as a legend. I mean, frankly, if you're ever going to die, that's the best way to go. You don't get to say goodbye, but you don't have to go through any pain or suffering, or you don't get old and feeble, and that's something he never wanted to do. So in a sense, he got to leave at 78 years old, physically fit, on his way to play tennis. A lot of people are jealous of that, especially people that get dementia or their life deteriorates so much, and we've seen so much of that. So those are the lessons. Sports taught me a lot of lessons and made kind of a man out of me, because I was small. I was real small. I mean, like when I was a ninth grader at Macaulay, Coach Bill Eiselstein will tell you, I was like 5'1", and if you'd have ever told him I'd end up being MVP my senior year, he'd have said, there ain't no way that'll ever happen. But I grew a lot, and I worked really hard, and so those are the lessons of life where you think, truthfully, about 80% of success in life is having the courage to do it. Yeah. And then about 10% is sticking with it. And then the other 10% is just the talent that God gives you, and some good fortune. But I tell young people all the time as a lesson that having the courage to start something is really the biggest challenge. And if you got the guts to go for it, you got a chance of getting there.
And I want this question to sound the right way. And I mean, great respect. Did you always have this intensity as a kid?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What drove that? Was that from your parents, or was it with your brothers?
Psychologically, maybe I'm the middle kid. I had an older brother, younger brother. You had to kind of break out. You got that intensity. I would say that God wound me up pretty tight from the very beginning. Yeah. I do believe that you're half how you're born with. God makes you that way, and the other half you acquire. You have decisions you can make as to who you become. I was intense when I was young, a kind of a fighter. But then, I crashed and burned, but I didn't die. And I came out of it and was able then, if you ever really are down and out, and I was, and I gave up, and I went through treatment, and I went sober 41 and a half years ago, the rest has been almost like a storybook.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. And so I continue to be sober. And that's the life that I knew. And George W. Bush and I had many conversations about this because we shared that. I was on Air Force One with him all day long one day talking about his history and my history. We ended up being friends, deep friends from that conversation, but we knew each other pretty well before that. But it's a similar experience where you know that you don't need to drink. Mm-hmm. And you finally have the guts to say, all right, I'm never going to do this again. And then you go through the whole process and you stick with it. And that gives you kind of a courage that you don't get any other way. I mean, you go through life monotone and not take any risk or fall or climb any big mountains, and you can survive fine, but you don't really have the depth or empathy or even courage that you get from falling and getting back up. And that's what my life story is. And it has given me kind of a hidden courage, I think, that a lot of people don't have. But it gave me a deep empathy for people. And that's also caused me not to, as I said to you before the show started, drink Kool-Aid. I don't like to just fall in line like I'm a Republican because somebody told me that this is what you're supposed to believe, or I'm a Democrat because I believe. I believe everybody has to be true to themselves and what they know is right. And that sometimes is going to be one of my quotes that lives forever is neither party has an exclusive on integrity. Neither party has an exclusive on ideas. Another one that's on the wall in Oak Ridge is the power to convene is greater than the power to legislate, which is my quote, but it's really important that, I saw my role as being a way to get people together around a cause. Mm-hmm. And everybody wants to go to Congress and write a bill, and I'm jumping around here, but it is a unique individual perspective on these things that I have from my life experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to you at Macaulay. You're a freshman, you're 5'1", you work hard, you're intense, and you end up being the star of the basketball team. Mm-hmm. What gets you to UNC?
Well, and I wasn't really the star. A guy named Steve Maloney was the star. The players voted me MVP, even though he was the star, because it's a team game, and somebody's got to set picks, somebody's got to dive for loose balls, somebody's got to draw charges, and somebody's got to make the gears work on a team. But the sixth man, that was my role. And that's why I played almost every minute of every game, and I always had to guard the best player on the other team because I was the defensive guy. But
a little bit like Zakai Ziegler.
Well, yeah, except he's a whole lot better than I ever was. But I did have one sort of partial offer, and that's interesting because Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi came through town. They were there to see Maloney play, but John Pregelman and I both had a good game that night, and so they met with all three of us, and they talked about partial help if you wanted to come play basketball there. So I kind of count that as some kind of offer because they did say you want to come. But tuition was like $1,200 a year, not much. But anyway, so because Coach Dean Smith was there for several of my games my senior year, and Scott Smith was the sixth man on our team and a real close friend of mine, and Dean got to know my mom and dad real well, and he told my parents that he thought if I wanted to come to Carolina, I could start on the JV. So I went to UNC with that said, and he even told me, I'm helping you come here. You have to go out. You have to, quote, be on the team, but you don't have to stay out. And that's exactly what I did because I'd already pledged a fraternity and girls were in the scene and blah, 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 blah. But I was out there. Dave Handers was the coach, and I had to show up. And if I would have stayed, I could have played some. But, again, I'm 5'10" and a half or whatever. And but I did get to stay close to the program. I worked the camps in the summer. I knew James Worthy because of Jimmy Braddock real well. I kind of helped coach recruit Jimmy Braddock to come to Carolina and got to know Perkins and Michael Jordan. And, in fact, at the 25th reunion of the 82 championship team in 2007, I'm a sitting member of Congress, and my son and I, Weston and I, sat with the team. My roommate at UNC was Erwin Jones from Macaulay, who had class of 75, high jump 6'10", won the state. High jump 7'1.5" at UNC, set the ACC record, and he was my roommate, still one of my closest friends. I was at his wedding a couple years ago. He'd never been married until like 69 years old, and he gets married at the Quail Hollow Country Club in Charlotte, and Greg Keith was there, and Carl McPhail, and Jim Raby, Tim Stump, all these guys that I played basketball with, and we were all there. But anyway, Erwin and I hung around Chapel Hill in the summers and would work the camps, and Coach Guthridge would work the camps, and all kind of crazy stories. But so you stay close to the program. And that's why Weston and I ended up sitting with the team. Erwin was with us, and they all wanted us to come over. And we're sitting there in the middle of these guys, these legends, of basketball. But that was a great thing. And to this very day, I'm a huge Carolina basketball fan because I was just close to the program. Never played a minute, but knew all of them. And I got there right when Walter Davis and Phil Ford and Coach Smith and Coach Thompson had just won the Olympic gold medal. And so there was a lot of electricity in the fall of '76 in Chapel Hill.
That'd be an exciting time there.
It was.
So you go to UNC, you're doing JV basketball, and you're pre-med, and that doesn't work out the way you want. What do you decide to focus on, or is it just, I just want to get my degree? Does it matter what you do?
Well, I never got my degree, and that's one of really maybe the only regret in my life. I try not to have any regrets because it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good, but I do have the regret that I never finished the work because I came close. I probably finished 2/3 of the requisite hours, but I left and went and booked bands in the ACC, and that's when I started kind of living a wilder life. My dad didn't like that and sent word to people to get him back over here, and that's when I actually had an opportunity to come back and work for Mr. Mills. My dad even set up a couple interviews, and I had interviews in Chattanooga, and Mr. Mills immediately hired me. He just kind of recognized me, I think, as somebody like him that needed a little bit of direction, and that was kind of a bridge. And then I went sober, and then the rest of it is, again, like a storybook ending.
What'd you do for Mr. Mills?
Because I'm an innate salesperson, he took me to Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden grew up, And I stayed there and was trained by the #1 studio salesperson in America. Her name was Ollie Rogers for 5 weeks. And then he sent me like a troubleshooter from region to region to region. And I would go in and identify what they were doing wrong. Actually, I would fire the people, actually give them notice, and then I would replace them, and I would train them, and I would get the sales back, and I would go to another spot. And for 2 years, I was like a national troubleshooter, turning studio sales around in regions. And I was in Brockton, Massachusetts. I was in San Antonio. I was in South Florida. I was in the Rust Belt of Ohio. And he bounced me around. And it was real successful. One of the reasons I left, and really the only reason I'd say I left, is that his nephew, Jim Hutchinson, was going to open up the Canadian division for Olin Mills and asked me to go and be his sales leader for Canada. And that was like culture shock.
Yeah, I bet.
And that's when my father, Tax Reform Act of 82 and all, said, we're going to start doing some development of multifamily housing in Florida. Do you want to come back and kind of lead that? And so I did.
That experience as a troubleshooter for Mills, that had to help you out in Congress to be able to evaluate something as a problem and come up with solutions.
It's interesting that everybody has got those pieces of their past that can contribute to who they are and what they become. And that's why at 50, I was so grateful to those type training moments.
Yeah.
And then in Congress, there was a couple of just rock solid friends of mine that Steve Largent's still alive. He was my roommate, and Tom Coburn passed during COVID. I've got a grandson named after him. I spoke at his funeral. He was the iconic conservative leader. The three of us were roommates in Congress and deeply grew to love each other, still do. And, of course, Largent's a famous guy.
Oh, yeah.
But they
Football
have
Hall of
poured
Fame.
leadership into me, both of them, in an amazing way. As a father, as a leader, as they've given me strength. And, the word encourage means to give courage. And so they encouraged me in a real way.
So how does that work? You get to Congress and you're looking for a roommate. Is it like college? You pull the name off the bulletin board, or did you guys already had a connection and said, yeah?
I can tell stories all day, but this is a real good one. So I intentionally, because I'd been through treatment, and because I was probably seen by some people as a risk, I had a lot of people praying for me, and I was very cautious because I did not want to, some people go to Congress and lose their soul. It's real easy to do. In fact, it's actually a lonely place if you're not careful. So I didn't immediately find a place to live. I got elected. I went through orientation, prepared, and even on the first day we were sworn in, I didn't know where I was going to stay. I was staying in a hotel when I was there, and Kim and I were literally saying, let's be cautious and deliberate. And on the very first day of that new first Republican Congress in 40 years, Dr. James Dobson had a radio show in Speaker DeLay's office, or Whip DeLay's office. Never done anything like that. And there was 8 people invited to be on that radio show, and I was one of them. And so was Steve Largent, and so was Tom Coburn. J.C. Watts was one of them. David McIntosh was one of them. But anyway, after that show, after all this patience, Tom Coburn said, where are you living? And I said, I don't know. And he said, Steve and I would like for you to come over to D Street. We have an extra room in our place that we've rented. And I became roommates with them. And it was like, there's a lot of funny stories that go with that because they kind of played some tricks on me. But I ended up being their roommate the whole time I was there, basically. Steve ran for governor like I did and was ahead and lost. And so then he wasn't there. But his whole time in Congress, we were roommates, and so was Coburn.
I would imagine that was a huge influence on you every night when you guys were together, and huge influence on each other.
Well, it's like Weston says a lot. He says he literally grew up at the feet of some really amazing national leaders. And those men are the best of the best. I mean, they really are. I won't say we don't have anybody like that today, but it has changed a lot. And when you grow up, or when I surround myself, and that's a gift from God, that you're surrounded with people that are that focused and that grounded and that good. And so that was incredible. And I met with them every week, and we moved together. Our families got to know each other. Frankly, when we had a vacation, we would vacation together. We all went to Tom Coburn's place in Breckenridge skiing together, and the families grew to love each other and stay close to each other. And that's amazing because that's not what people usually experience serving in the United States Congress.
Yeah. you were working for Mills, you get back into the family business. What makes you decide to run for Congress?
So I'd been real involved in politics, but it was helping other people get elected. And I always tell people there's 5 or 6 ways to end up where I ended up. Name recognition is one of them. Largent was an iconic guy. You know, he had fame, and so he just kind of walks into it. But my journey was, in fact, when I closed the biggest real estate deal I ever closed, Hicks Armour, Wayne Crop, Corker, some of my friends had a dinner, and it was at the old boathouse. And Wayne and Hicks kind of approached me that night and said, okay, you almost got yourself completely out of debt as a young man. You need to run for Congress. And I mean, I'd never run for anything, but I'd been the party leader. I'd been the chairman of the party at 30 years old. I'd worked, my first campaign was Gene Roberts' mayor's campaign in 1983, and I was the youth coordinator, and John Davis's congressional campaign, Harold Coker's, on and on and on. I'd run a bunch of campaigns, but I'd never run myself, never even thought about it, really. And they said, we think you need to run for Congress. And I literally said that night, I'm just a few years out of treatment. I hadn't been sober long enough, maybe later in my life, but I'm not ready. I'm going home that night, and my wife says, what'd you think about what Hicks and Wayne said to you tonight? And I said, I don't know, Kim, what do you think? And she said, I think they're right. I think people will forgive you if you're just honest. Get emotional when I think about that, because that's exactly what happened. I went to the newspaper in 92, in 91. I'll never forget when I told Helen Hardin, after all the politics I did, I said, I think I have a candidate for us for Congress in 92. And this was like January of 91. And she said, who? And I said, me. And she just about fell out. She said, what? And I said, yeah, I think Kim and I are just, have committed to do this. I said, I called Dan Johnson. He called John Germ. They both called back and said, Germ said, I'm staying with Maryland. Dan's going to go with you. That way we can't lose. Typical John Germ, Dan Johnson deal. And so that began, but it began because those guys gave me courage.
Yeah.
And Kim validated that. And I took a step, and I went to the newspaper, and I mean, the front page was ugly. It said, Wamp opens up on drugs and alcohol. That was the headline.
That was the headline.
And so, in politics, you want a unfave of 3-1 or better. And literally my first poll was like 1-1. For every 2 people, 1 person had unfavorable, 1 had favorable. When I finally got elected, it was like 6-1. And it was all because they felt like I was honest, and here's my problems, but I think I can make a difference if you'll give me a chance. It also gave me an empathy and a compassion, again, for everybody that most people don't have, because when you've been down and out, you better approach it with a little humility, because there by the grace of God go I. And people look at that. So it gave me a fresh start. And ironically, Marilyn Lloyd, who I ran against, but I think I ran mostly respectfully against her, she turns around in my first reelection and endorses me. And the Democrats hated her for that. But we ended up being friends.
Yeah.
And I tried to kind of follow in the footsteps of, right of center, conservative leadership, but respecting everyone, and most of all, respecting the Constitution and the process and traditions and norms of this great country.
And those are all important things. And I love the fact that you brought up empathy and gratitude. The other thing I took note of what you said, a lot of times when someone decides to run for office, they're trying to convince their spouse it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And your spouse is the one that said to you, no, you really need to do this.
Yeah, now, I'm not sure later on she was real pleased with her own decision, because she had to work really hard to raise 2 kids when I wasn't there, and did a fantastic job with it. And the greatest thing about Cody and Weston, and I always add Marcus, because Cody's husband is a 19-year Green Beret, 12 deployments, 6 DOD deployments, 6 agency deployments. So it's not just Weston and Cody serving, it's Weston, Cody, and Marcus serving. And but their service, or their willingness to go through the process to get elected to serve, honors me in a way that I can't explain, because that's the greatest tribute to my service, is that they would actually be willing to go do it themselves. It's not just like what happened in Minnesota. These are dangerous times, and these are troubling times, and we need leadership. And public service should be a noble calling. It's not like it used to be, and it should be, and that pains me. And
why do you think that is?
Because partially because of this. I'm holding up the iPhone. Social media has really dumbed down and everybody is an expert and everybody's got all the information, and truth has become jaded and watered down, and people have their own version of the truth, and people want to blame everybody else. There's more people passing blame at the others than there is accepting responsibility and collective responsibility. John Adams originally said that our Constitution was created for moral and religious people and wholly inadequate to govern any other. And I always say the modern version of that is if people are not responsible to a certain set of values and take care of each other and embrace the responsibilities of this much freedom, this doesn't work. And so I think half the people are not willing to accept the responsibilities. They'd rather blame somebody else, or they'd rather be a victim than a problem solver. And as a result, we have half the country just disconnected and doesn't even trust establishment principles. They don't. I would say that they don't trust their government, and they don't trust elected leaders. And it's almost like a vicious cycle we're in, where if they don't trust, and then some people in office don't give them a reason to trust. If there's a bunch of grifters trying to create lists and market themselves in Congress instead of true public servants that are there to serve the public. I believe that I had one of the greatest role models for public service come before me in America. His name was Bill Brock. And he started from he had a family that had a history of this, but he is, by his own admission, he wasn't a great speaker. He didn't have all the tools, but he actually was about trying to help people and serving. And he did it well with distinction all the way to the highest level. And that's what I was trying to do. And I really believe that it should be raised up in this country instead of dumbed down. And that's part of the problem. But it's a complex problem.
We were talking earlier to someone else about Tennessee's history of having pragmatic problem solvers.
Yeah.
Not just Tennessee today, but you don't see that much anymore. It's more partisan than anything else.
Yeah, and I always point back to the Iraq invasion.
Yeah.
Afghanistan was totally justified after 9/11, but then Iraq was, everybody agreed to do it, but it was based on flawed information about nuclear weapons and Saddam Hussein and all these problems. But everybody believed it. Everybody from Hillary Clinton to George W. Bush believed it. But instead of accepting responsibility that we all made a mistake, Harry Reid and Tom DeLay decided to weaponize those things against each other. And there are two people that I think have a lot of responsibility around the division of blame and criticism and making partisan politics just more important than it really is. I mean, frankly, we're all Americans. Mm-hmm. And if we can't work our differences out through healthy debate and votes through a democratic process, shame on us. The framers wanted us to do that. And now they'd rather, gun people down or blast them on social media or try to keep people from even being able to win a primary. Everybody gets primaried if they're not exactly like this person. All of that dumbs down the process of civil government. And that's where we are. It's reality. But kudos to the people like Weston and Cody and others, especially young people, that will actually have anything to do with it, because most young people won't. And that's why there are not many young people. You know how many prominent under 40-year-old elected officials there are in the state of Tennessee? You count them on two hands, and two of them are my kids. So that honors me, but it's important, and we can't give up on it, because civil government takes our investment, and it takes all of our leaning in to civil government. It is a participatory process, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease in government, and you got to have people in the game. Everybody can't just take their cards and go home, because this place won't work.
I want to get to Cody and Weston, but I do want to cover a little bit more of Congress with you.
Yep.
And it's really two questions. What over your term was not necessarily your greatest accomplishment, but your greatest memory? And what was the thing that made you say, man, this just isn't working? Not for you, but as an institution.
Well, one of my greatest memories was I was very active in the prayer breakfast, and still am, the National Prayer Breakfast. And even last Thursday, I was in Washington, and I went to the weekly group. And they asked me to speak because I was involved for 16 straight years every single week in the prayer breakfast. But it allowed me in 2001, George W. Bush had been president for about 2 weeks. And this was his first National Prayer Breakfast. And I was the chairman of the whole thing. And I got to set the agenda and the program and introduce him. And first one, even though his father had been there, and his father was very active in all of it. So that was a real high moment, was to be able to chair the National Prayer Breakfast in 2001. And then there's a lot of legislative accomplishments. I will say one thing that most people don't realize is that 9/11 happened, and within 5 days, Tom Ridge was asked, former governor of Pennsylvania, former U.S. congressman, was asked by President Bush to actually organize the response to 9/11. He came to the Hill, and there was a small meeting where he asked Bill Young, the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, and Hal Rogers, the chairman of Commerce, Justice, State Appropriations Subcommittee, of which I was the vice chairman at the time, which oversaw the State Department, the FBI, and some pieces that ended up becoming DHS. And we sat in a room for a few hours and decided that we were going to need to start moving money, and we didn't have the authorization by law of any committee to actually do what we were about to do. So we established a new Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee. It started in the House, and Hal Rogers became the first chairman, and I was the vice chairman. Hal Rogers told him, I'll do this, but I want Zach to do it with me. And we went together. And for 3 years, we organized 22 agencies, consolidated 190,000 FTEs, full-time equivalents, into a new department called Homeland Security. A year later, they established an authorization committee in the Congress to authorize what we had already been funding for a year. We set up the TSA. We set up all of the HHS responses for labs and anecdotes for dirty bomb explosions, and just go down the list. And I was immediately taken to the highest level of our national security classification, and I went in D.C. to every single hot spot, including all throughout the White House and the bunker and everywhere, to understand what our liabilities were. I was real involved, and most people wouldn't know that, but on my resume, it says that I was involved in this establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, but I literally was for 3 years hands-on involved in the way this whole thing came out. Admiral Loy said it'd take 20 years for it to mature. Frankly, it's 25 years later, and it still hasn't matured, but it was significant, that response, and I was real involved in it.
Well, and from the perspective of pre-9/11, there really wasn't a thought of that. And then all of a sudden, the day after, all of that's on the plate.
Yeah, and even the Capitol Visitor Center, which I was real involved in, was a reaction to that, and that's a whole nother story. And then, in Tennessee, from the Chickamauga Lock to the Moccasin Bend and other things, I've got regional priorities. Oak Ridge was a big priority for me, but at the national level, those are things that I'm really proud of that I had a hand in.
So those are accomplishments. You're in Congress for 16 years. What was the thing or things that you said, man, it's not like when I started, or I really don't like where we're headed?
Well, after we lost the majority 12 years into it, and when you go from the majority to minority, it does change your perspective. And I'm not selfishly saying that because I couldn't be as influential as I was before I decided to leave, but I did get really frustrated at the blame game. I mean, I really felt like we should, and I gave a lot of speeches at Republican conferences about us stepping up and accepting responsibility and putting the country first and not blaming the other team. I became almost a burr in the saddle of the leadership on things that we should be doing that we weren't doing. And part of it's because I had friends on both sides, from one corner to the other. I mean, I literally, when I was a freshman, Mike, I decided that with this incredible privilege that this idiot of a guy who had fallen and got back up had this chance to be one of 11,000 people in the history of the country to serve in the United States Congress. I read a bunch of books. I understood the history of the Capitol. I took 1,800 groups through the Capitol in 16 years. When Hastert did the history of the Capitol with C-SPAN, there were several members he asked to be involved in, and I was one of them. And I told him how I had taken the tours and how it all evolved. But I took a great passion in the whole thing of trying to make a difference while I was there. So it was real frustrating for me that the blame game became institutionalized and nobody would accept responsibility. And I was very outspoken trying to get Republicans to quit blaming everybody and get solution oriented. I felt like the contract with America was solution oriented. We got there, we were on a mission. We knew what we were there for. We wanted the people to see the progress we had made. I felt like we had lost that. And then we go into a minority status. And, I started thinking about, either coming home and going back to the private sector or running for office. I happened to pick the worst cycle in 100 years to run for governor because it was the Haslam cycle. Yeah. And Bill Haslam ended up being a very good governor for 2 terms, and it all worked out the way it was supposed to work out. But when I first got in, I was not certain at all he was going to run. I thought he was just flirting with the whole thing. And then I got in the race, then he got in the race, and then 2 months later, 3 months later, in a weird turn of events, Ron Ramsey got in the race. Yeah. Ron Ramsey and I split the conservative base of Tennessee, and so I didn't really have a chance of winning. But I ran a good race, and I would also always say to anybody, if you can run a credible statewide race for statewide office in your state, do it. It's an unbelievable experience. I went into all 95 counties. We went like 80,000 miles on the bus. I got to know people all over the state. I got to understand the state. It was a great experience. Even losing, it was a great experience. But you're not obligated to do it a second time. But I left at 53 years old. And everybody said, you got to go back and run, do this and that. And I said, no, honestly, I do believe that people hang on to these things too long. And the people that stay there into their 80s, they've not served us well. Look at this. This is a real chronic problem for both parties. People in their 80s are not the same as people in their 40s. If I get sick and somebody operates on me, I don't want an 80-something-year-old person operating on me. I want the best 42-year-old doctor you can find in this country to operate on me. And that's the way the Congress ought to be looked at. We need younger people involved. So I stepped aside and pushed the flesh part back. Oh, Zach, you were great. You need to go back and do this, or you need to go run for the Senate, or you need to do this. And I just said, no, this is where I'm going to practice what I preach, and the next generation should be encouraged to step up.
Yeah.
Because the framer said 25 in the House, 30 in the Senate, 35 for president. And I saw the next generation, and my kids have heard this their whole life. So it doesn't really surprise me that they both got interested, because I've been preaching this my whole life, is that young Americans need to be given an opportunity to lead, because they're the ones with the most skin in the game. They've got the longest life in front of them to either enjoy the benefits of this democratic republic or not. And so they should be allowed to lead. And that's why Weston set up the Millennial Debt Foundation, because the debt and inflation and these problems effectively are generational theft. Our generation is taken since World War II and not given back. And now our kids are going to have to kind of pay the price for it. And that's generational theft. So they should be allowed to step up, but they should also be called to public service, because that's how you get things done.
And kudos to you for maintaining that stance. And that leads me to the question of both Cody and Weston, obviously Weston's county mayor, Cody's district attorney. What was that feeling for you like on election night when you realized they both won their races? I mean, that's a pretty darn big deal. In different ways, in extraordinary pride. I mean, there's a picture of Kim and I. We didn't know it was being taken when Cody was giving her acceptance speech after she beat the incumbent district attorney in the primary. And the pride we have in her, because you go to law school and you set these goals, to first she was a public defender, then assistant DA, and then run for DA. And, she's one of only 4 women out of 32 in the state of Tennessee. She's the youngest by 7 years of any of the 32 district attorneys in this state. And for her to fight through a tough primary and then win decisively was very rewarding for us. And frankly, we need more women in office, in my opinion, and especially conservative women, in my opinion. And she fits that bill to a T. And in some ways and in some audiences, she may be the most popular elected official in Southeast Tennessee today, because she's tough, but she's got a heart, and she's a woman, and she's a fighter. Weston obviously really wasn't supposed to win. That was a surprise to a whole lot of people that it was as competitive as it was. I think everybody thought early on that Hollander might win, and then he kind of fell, and then here comes Sabrina running a strong race. And then I think Weston on the ground ran exactly the kind of race that he needed to run to have a chance, and he pulled it off. And a lot of it was around the pockets of the county. So that was rewarding, but he'd run before. And Weston is almost like made for this. So it's a very different picture. Cody is, obviously a lawyer, district attorney is a different kind of position. You think of Gary Gerbich. I never thought of those people as like politicians. And Weston, having run and lost and run again, but his desire to serve at the local level
is admirable because he's national timber, but he doesn't even want to go to Washington because Washington is a holy mess right now. It's not conducive, especially for a young family with 5 kids, 10 and under. So he's able to fight through to serve locally, but he's a change agent. Because he's seen this for so long, he is not a status quo guy, and he's honestly not doing this for himself because it's kind of tough. But he's figured it out, and you're working with 11 commissioners, and so it's not like a unilateral type deal. And I think because he was young when he got elected, some of them wanted to kind of teach him a lesson. I even heard some of them say, well, we got to be like his father. No, I'm his father. He doesn't need a father. In fact, he knows a lot about this, all of it. And he's a student, always has been. From the youngest of days, he learns things and absorbs things and is interested in things. He could have been a sports commentator because the dude is next level on players and baseball, basketball. It's really, and now he's got his sons. He's got 4 sons in the same kind of a mode, but he's got good retention. But he's a change agent, and that's not easy in the old county courthouse.
No, not at all. A couple more questions before we run out of time. Talk a little bit about what you're doing now, and then just give me a real quick on what you think the next decade will be like for Hamilton County and Chattanooga.
So the last 14 years, I've had a really interesting run. I could talk about. I've had some relationship with like 30 different clients in different ways, but I don't lobby. I'm a consultant, but I do a whole lot of business development. I work a lot in the power sector, and I'm in the energy sector, and a whole lot of what I do. And I had that knowledge base from Congress. But I was in business with Sheila and Dane Boynton for 10 years, and we built a computer science coding and STEM awareness platform called Learning Blade, took it to 14 statewide contracts. I was their minority partner, and we sold. So that was one of the bigger business events of my life. We sold to eDynamic Learning, which is the largest private education company in the country. I was the chairman of the board of Chicago Bridge and Iron Federal Services for 4 of the 5 years I was on that board. I worked for Cerberus for 3 years, which is a big private equity firm out of New York City with Dan Quayle and John Snow. And their founder is now the Deputy Secretary of Defense under Trump. And I can just go through these extraordinary opportunities I've had from board service, and I've done a few real estate deals. But it's been a real good run. The best advice I ever got in business came from Howard Baker, believe it or not. When I lost to Haslam, about 3 weeks later, Griscom said, Senator Baker wants you to come to Huntsville, Tennessee and spend a half a day with him. And I go up there and he said, what are you going to do? And I kind of told him the trade associations have approached me, and there's 2 of these trade associations want me to run them, and blah, 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 blah. And then he kind of laid out what he thought I ought to do. And then he said, the biggest advice I'm going to give you is don't raise your standard of living when you leave. Don't buy a new house, new car, new clothes. Get out of debt. Whatever you do the first 2 or 3 years, work at paying down any debt that you've accumulated or whatever from serving in Congress, because my kids went to college and law school without any student loans, and we just had to live within our means, Kim and I, to get it done in Congress. And he said, I think you can do it in 2 years. And I did it in 2 years and 1 month. And he laid out what I should do. And it's been extraordinary. It really has been extraordinary because Senator Baker, you wouldn't think he would give me the greatest business advice I ever got, but he did.
He had a lot of good advice for everyone. And what do you see as the next decade for Chattanooga?
So I do think Weston's first year assessment of the future of Hamilton County, I thought it was real interesting. He said it's North and it's Latino, because it is changing so dramatically. If you look at our schools and see how many Latin students there are. Now, Trump obviously is closing the border, but they're here. And he's going to deport some people, but his deportation rate's not much different than Obama's right now. So I don't think that's going to really impact the Latino population. And they're going to grow, and they're going to continue to grow. And so that's the future. But I actually think it's really good because, we do have good stewardship, balanced budget, natural resources, parks, a lot of public spaces. I would say, though, we almost ran on fumes for 10 years of the past, because I really believe when Corker and Claude and I were together and Kinsey, man, we had stuff cooking here.
It's a pretty good team.
Yeah, we had things cooking, and we were united with the philanthropic sector and the chamber, and we had an agenda, but the electeds were in it. And then we had this laissez-faire period, and I think we sunk a little. And I think it's coming back. I see the dynamism coming back. But again, I think Weston's disrupted the good old boy system in the courthouse, and rightly so. It's time to change it. And I think City Hall sometimes, to me, leans a little bit too left, and they can come back to the center. But I do think that collectively the city and the county are positioned extremely well. But because people come, you heard Governor Lee last week come here and say that people in Nashville are saying, man, Chattanooga is such a great place. And it is. It absolutely is. But it could even do better. But it does take, to me, the secret sauce is when the philanthropic sector, Jack Lupton was the best, but we still have those families and we still have that next generation. In the philanthropic sector, the business sector, and the elected leaders are in unison and committed to the same vision, good things happen. And when any one of those three breaks down or is not at the table, it doesn't work. And I think we've seen that in the past. I just know when I had the privilege of serving and helping locally, we had all three of those sectors really singing in unison.
Yeah, and I like your answer because it's a reminder not to sit back on your laurels.
We can't. We can't. Everybody else will pass us up because at Murfreesboro, they're going strong. Clarksville's going strong. And even Knoxville's going strong. You know, we've had this competitive deal with Knoxville for a long time. And for a while, we were the envy of Knoxville. And so now we got to make sure that doesn't, that the allure doesn't fall off.
Well, I think we're fortunate we have so much pride in where we live. And everyone who comes here stays here and wants it to be its best. Before I get to my last question, I want to remind listeners who makes all this possible. Thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, my standard last question for you, Zach. What would you tell that 25-year-old Zach Wamp is important for a happy life?
I would say to the 25-year-old Zach Wamp, I know you're going to fight hard, and I know you're going to work hard, but keep your heart soft, love the people around you, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Boy, that hits right at home. It's not just relationships, those personal relationships, and probably the ones who sacrifice the most, family.
Amen to that. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.